Hey listeners, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. I get the privilege of working alongside all of the creators at Enrollify, and I want to take just a moment to tell you about why I Want to Work There, a podcast hosted by Eddie Francis. In an era where attracting and keeping talent is more crucial and complex than ever, I Want to Work There dives deep into how colleges and universities can stand out as top employers. Whether you're involved in HR, leadership, or just keen on the dynamics of higher ed employment, this podcast is your new go-to resource. Join Eddie Francis as he tackles the pressing issues of employee recruitment and retention and offers actionable insights for positioning your institution as an employer where everyone wants to work. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search I Want to Work There wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Today I am joined by 3 guests from Albright College to talk about a podcast on a podcast. How very meta of us. I'm joined by Dr. Jacquelyn Fetrow, president of Albright College, Michelle Arevalo, enrollment marketing and communications manager, and Matthew Bieber, assistant professor of business. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation, Shane.
Yes, it's great to be here.
Thank you, Shane. This is an honor to be here with you.
So I'm excited to talk about this because we're in an interesting time for college presidents in terms of their voice mattering probably as much as it ever has. And so, Jackie, I'm interested from your standpoint. You're the host of Albright Out Loud. What was your motivation for wanting to start your own podcast? Tell us a little bit about the podcast and how you believe it complements Albright College's mission.
Well, that's a big question. And I would say that the thinking about the podcast was in the works for a while. What we were attempting to do was think about how we move beyond the traditional ways where we communicate with the market through our Albright Alumni Magazine or our other ways that we traditionally communicate to. How do we reach a bigger audience? And I don't even remember how it came up at one point because we were thinking of blogs, but then blogs became passé and a few other things. And I don't even know how it came up, but somebody said, well, what about a podcast? I think we brainstormed on that for about 6 months. And then Michelle jumped into the breach and said, I think we could do this. And the idea is really to share the stories. One of the really special things about Albright College is the opportunities that we provide students of academic promise. Students of promise, they come from our public high schools here in Pennsylvania and beyond to work very closely with talented and amazingly dedicated faculty like Matthew, and not just sit in the classroom, but to actually engage with those faculty one-on-one and in small groups in projects where, again, they're not just classroom learning. They're applying their classroom learning to real-world situations. And we wanted to highlight those stories. And then sometimes we also highlight alums and how they have used their Albright education in their careers and why an education at a small independent college like Albright College matters. So that was kind of originally how it was conceived and what we've aimed to do. We're in the 3rd season.
Wow. So you've maintained time to do this with the president's schedule. Have there been any challenges in terms of creating this content regularly from your side of things?
I think we have. Maybe Michelle can answer that question. I think we have more content than we can use. We record we release about every 3 weeks. We record every 2 to 3 weeks. And I regularly, I hear stories of things that our amazing faculty are doing, and I share them, and Michelle has a very long list. And so I think the challenge is, which ones do we actually invite, and how do we prioritize them?
Yeah, there's no shortage of stories to tell, I'm sure. So, Michelle, I want to ask you from a marketing communications perspective, what are some of the strategies, first of all, in terms of deciding what stories to tell, and then how do you see and have you seen an impact from the podcast in terms of the college's marketing, branding, reputation efforts?
Well, as far as deciding what episodes to air, it is difficult because we have so many great stories that we record. But a lot of the time it's something timely. Like if we've got a play that's currently or just been produced on campus, we try to get that out as quickly as possible. Or we did a great show last year with graduating seniors. We had 3 students that were about to graduate come on and talk about their overall experience and how they felt about their future, taking that step into a career that they had worked so hard on. So that has a lot to do with it, timeliness, but also we've just recently delved into miniseries where we have, a bunch of episodes, 3 or 4 episodes that kind of all go together in terms of student stories or like faculty and student collaboration projects. So though that kind of dictates how we air them. As far as seeing the benefit of the podcast, that's like any new endeavor, it's taken some time. Like Jackie said, we're in the 3rd season, but we're really starting to hit our stride, and find our audience a lot better than we did 2 years ago. And really at this point, we're just trying to keep that ball rolling. But we've seen an increase on our website traffic, and we've seen an increase in attendance at campus visit events, recruitment events, and just overall inquiries in terms of students going on the website and submitting their information because they've heard something that sparked interest on their part, and then they give us their info so that we can reach out to them and have them come to campus.
That's great. So it's turned into a marketing tool, it seems, and
yeah,
that's exciting. So who was the original kind of audience? What was the intention? Was this sort of an internal communications tool that's moved into an enrollment recruitment piece, or was it always we want to use this as an enrollment recruitment tool?
I think it was everything. It was just trying to raise awareness about the college. And at first, our audience was primarily internal. The interesting thing was that internal audience was learning things, even though they were part of the community. They were learning things, that they didn't know were happening in classrooms or with students. But we're seeing now that it's been on the air for 3 years that we're starting to build more of the external audience, which is really exciting because, there's so much great stuff happening at Albright, and that really has to get out there to the wider world.
That's great. And that's exciting because as a fellow podcast host, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do these things. So I'm glad your efforts are paying off.
Yes.
And Matthew, I wanted you to come on today, not only because you and I are friends and go back, and you were mentioning before the episode that our last podcast together was the highest, the most views of that particular podcast. So we're gonna shoot for that in this episode. But I wanted to bring you on not only because you also have a marketing background, but you are an assistant professor of business now at Albright. And so I'm wondering from a faculty perspective, what's the benefit for faculty in terms of bringing the work that you're doing in the classroom and the work that your students are doing and giving that a platform and also kind of facilitating learning beyond the classroom?
Sure. I am a reformed higher education marketer. My calling is definitely in the classroom, but I do have a lot of experience recruiting students to campus, and the value is immense, right? So we're at a point where society and the media are questioning the value of higher education. And at the same time, advertising is not as effective as it used to be. Our audiences are fragmented. Everybody has their own interests, their own niche things that they want to consume. And everyone is busier than ever. We're not watching TV in a linear fashion anymore. We're not listening to radio in a linear fashion. Everybody wants their media, wants their entertainment in a form that they can consume at their own place and time. And when you add on the fact that people don't want to be sold to anymore, we want authenticity in the messaging and the advertising. Storytelling brings immense value to higher education marketing. Students want to see themselves on campus, or they want to hear about what it could look like for them to be on campus. They want to picture themselves there. They want to hear about the types of things that they'll be working on, and they want to learn about the professors and get to know the professors that they'll be spending 4 years with, a lot of time with, and in those 4 years, more time than they'll probably be spending with their parents. So if we can convey those things through a podcast or any other form of digital marketing, social media, that's a plus. What we're doing is we're creating social proof. We're saying we're here, we're doing this, and if you come here, you can do this as well. But beyond that, from a faculty perspective, it gives us another platform. It gives us a platform with resonance to tell our stories, to tell people what we're doing in the classroom. I want others to know when I have amazing guest speakers come in, when people from Entrepreneur Magazine and the Savannah Bananas are speaking in my class. I want people to know when we are working with community organizations to build marketing plans and social media marketing plans for that organization that elevates what they're doing. And even if you take it beyond that, we're telling student stories. We're telling faculty stories. We're also telling student stories. And when we tell those student stories, we're telling students that they matter and what they do here matters. And there is no greater value than that. And I want to just take this one step further. I believe in my classes that learning by doing is the best way to learn, that experiences are the best way to learn. And if we have active podcasts on campus, if we have other forms of digital and social that students can get involved with, they're hungry to be a part of these types of activities, of these types of experiences. And there's an opportunity for us to leverage what we're doing from a President's Podcast throughout the university to make education here more meaningful and more valuable to where they're going in their lives.
Yeah, I love what you said there about, it gives us another way to tell stories that are authentic and don't feel like another ad on Facebook, another ad on Google or YouTube. It gives us a way to really conversationally tell the story of our institution. So it's a great insight.
Can I jump in there? Because I think Matthew's exactly right in that engagement with students. Because we've had students. We did an episode early on D3 football, and I had a couple of football players and the coach talking about team. And one of the students was so excited that he came to me later and he said, could we do another podcast? I have an idea for one. So these two gentlemen came into the podcast and we did an episode on, it was on the diversity of the Albright campus and the representation of persons of color, because we're a very diverse campus, and how we offer opportunities to such students. And Michelle, Jared has reached out to me because he wants to know when it's going to post.
Yes, that's the thing. We have so many great stories. It's all about, scheduling. So yeah, I'll have to get in touch with him about that.
A little behind the curtain, look there. That's really fascinating to hear that students are coming to you with ideas for a podcast. I feel like it makes, Jackie, yourself as the president of the college, it gives you a level of sort of accessibility that's interesting to think about. A lot of times, I forget where I heard this, but I think it was at a conference where somebody said, my president served me mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving and gave me my diploma at graduation. And that's all I saw of this person. So it's interesting to hear that students are feeling comfortable enough to come to you with ideas for this podcast.
It's one of the great things about the Albright campus is the community. I can walk through the dining hall and our faculty and our students have really awesome relationships. And the students and the administrators also do. We can walk through the dining hall and students will say hi and invite me to come to one of their student organization meetings. I think it just like with faculty, it's part of who we are at Albright.
That's great. And it strikes me that Albright is a collaborative campus and a community, which lends itself perfectly to this podcast called Breaking Silos. So I'm wondering, from all of you, and Jackie, I would like to start with you. Can you share a particularly memorable episode or story that sort of embodies that collaborative spirit of Albright?
I really love that question, Shane. And I'm like, okay, when I read the question, I'm like, which one do I pick? So I'm going to pick, because that was really hard. And I'm really looking forward to the ones we're doing on excellence in teaching. That's that mini series that Michelle talked about. But I think one of the ones that really stands out for me was called Spring Awakening. And my guests on the Albright Out Loud podcast were our senior artist in residence, Jeff Lentz, who has won awards for his singing nationally. And he's here on our campus, also an Albright alum, teaching our students in music and in theater. And then a young man, and Michelle, I'm blanking on his name, who was the assistant director for last spring's theater production of the production called Spring Awakening. And Spring Awakening was a really impactful theater production on our campus because it's about a group of students, actually from a century ago, where they are actually struggling with some of the same things that our students are struggling with today. How do they be accepted for who and what they are, for their gender identity, their sexual identity, their intellectual ability, who they are? And there was a lot of really impactful, it really mattered to our campus. So the student was the assistant director to Jeff, who was the director of the production. And we had this amazing conversation, not just about what it was like as a sophomore student to be an assistant director of the entire one of the spring productions, but to really think together from both the faculty and the student point of view, the issues that the play brought forward, that we could talk about in ways, and this, each of us presented our ways of thinking about the issues and the conflicts raised in the play. It was, I think, an amazing episode. And Michelle, I think it's won a Cuppy Award, hasn't it?
I think so. I still am waiting to hear officially. That award was just given out. Yeah, that's what I put forth. Yeah, but I'm still waiting to hear whether we got gold, silver, or bronze. But I know it won. And that was just last week. But yeah, and the assistant director, the student, was Ben Galosi. And
that's who it was. Thank you.
He's accomplished actor even before he became a freshman here. I think he's in his sophomore year. When he did the directing.
Yeah, he was sophomore when he did the assistant director, and he's actually full director as a junior on this spring's production of You're in Town.
Yeah, so there's just that actually was our highest listened to episode to date.
Great.
It was really, really good.
That's great. An award-winning episode at that.
Yes, we can say that now. Yeah.
So Matthew, you have been a guest on the podcast, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us about what it was like to be on the podcast, and again, talking about this spirit of collaboration, faculty, marketing, president's office, others, I'm sure, coming together to kind of partner on these episodes.
Absolutely. So I have been a guest, and I was very thankful to be asked. I feel like it took too long to be asked to be on the podcast, but that's a discussion for another day. But and it is unaired yet, so I should be bugging Michelle about getting that podcast on the air, because I like to hear myself talk, apparently. But like any good guest, we have to listen to the podcast. We should listen to the podcast before we step onto the set. And I went down a rabbit hole, and I was just impressed with the depth of the stories, both from students and faculty. And it really helped me, as someone who's only in their second year here, get a better feel for what we're doing on campus. My favorite memory, my favorite episode is the episode that I was on, and not because I was on it. I mean, that's I got to be deeper than that. I can't just say because I was on it, that's my favorite. But the reason that it was my favorite is because we talked about excellence in teaching and what we're doing here in the classrooms at Albright, from experiential learning and simulations and how we treat students. But the memorable thing for me was that Joe Hoyle, he's the associate professor of accounting at the University of Richmond. He was also a guest on the podcast. And if you know Joe and his work, he's written a book, called Transformative Teaching, Stories That Inspire. And I think the three of us were in the room, Michelle, President Fetrow, myself. You could just listen to him forever because he gets what it means to be a teacher, and not an academic, not an educator, a teacher, and being of service, and not just teaching students numbers and accounting principles, but teaching them about life. And as I sat there and took that all in, it really impacted me, to the fact that I've adopted some of what Joe prescribed into my classes. He talks about creating a buzz before class even starts, and he emails students in the middle of the summer, for class starting in August, to start to generate a buzz in his classroom, to start getting them talking about it. And while I couldn't do that this time around, I did email them before class started, about a week before class started, because I do want to create that buzz. Because what I've come to realize is I'm responsible for my classroom. I'm responsible for the amount of students that I have in my class. If I can connect with them and create buzz around my classes, then my classes should be full. So what I got out of that episode, being a guest on that episode, and why it was so memorable to me, was sitting around a table and talking about teaching with people who are very knowledgeable about teaching. And I also should say, like, it wasn't just me and Joe, and President Fetrow already mentioned him, but Jeffrey Lentz, from our theater and arts department, he was there, and to talk about storytelling and what he's doing in a field that is, at first glance, different than mine, marketing and theater, but we're both trying to tell stories. It was just a very memorable and impactful moment for me that I hope when it's eventually aired will resonate with the listeners as well.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times best-selling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
That's great. And this is really why I wanted to highlight this podcast and this partnership across campuses, because, for somebody that's working on campus day to day, to be inspired like that from a project that's happening at campus is frankly the whole point of this podcast. There's work like this going on across the country. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Matt, and how you were sort of, what you got out of being on the podcast.
Could I add one other thing?
Sure.
So we, in higher education, I mean, we've all been in higher education a very long time, and there's this thought process that higher education is very, very siloed, and it should not be. We are going to get the most. Albright is going to get the most out of itself. Other institutions are going to get the most out of themselves if we break down those silos, name of the podcast, right, and work together. So, to be able to step out of Rosner Hall and spend some time with Michelle and be invited by President Fetrow, that's what higher education and collegiality is all about. And if we're going to push forward into our next line of successes, into greater success, we really need to embrace that collaboration, between departments and between faculty and staff, administration staff, whatever it is. So I should just say, like right here while we're on this podcast, thank you to Michelle and President Fetrow for having me and also doing this with me too, because, I roped them into this.
I think this is great, and I'm very happy you roped us into it, Matthew. You had some great stories. I think there was learning. You mentioned both Jeff and Joe and the things that they shared. You had some really excellent stuff to share about how you would teach and engage students as well. And I have found myself paying attention to your LinkedIn feed and how much you bring outside folks in and engage students into really what you're teaching them, how it matters in the real world.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
So I want to shift to the marketing side of things here with you, Michelle. In producing this podcast and being sort of the facilitator of the podcast and telling which stories get told, what are some of the most effective ways that you've engaged not only the campus community but external audiences? And what are some challenges you might have faced along the way?
I would say some of the most effective are social media, for instance, and that includes LinkedIn. Sometimes the undergrad audience doesn't participate in LinkedIn very much, but it's surprising how many of them do have a LinkedIn and they learn about it, that way. I would say one of the biggest things that's helped us boost is we did do some digital advertising on iHeartMedia. So we ended up reaching people on podcasting apps, which was a smart move to try and raise awareness in that regard. And then just word of mouth. It's been really rewarding to see word of mouth, particularly the internal audience. But I think that some students go home and they tell their friends and family about it. And we end up growing outside campus in that regard too. And of course, building the audience is the biggest challenge because there's a lot of media out there, like Matt said, and people consume it in the way that suits them best, which is great, but it can make it very difficult to reach people. But yeah, I'm excited by where we're going. When we started, as Jackie said, we were just going to see what happened, and the fact that we're now on season 3 is really great. And the episodes are just amazing. I mean, the things that you learn. I'm happy that I'm involved in this because I get to be a fly on the wall and I learn things about individual stories that are happening for the people in this community. And I think they're very much stories that the world needs to hear. So we're on our journey and we're moving up slow, but we're moving up, and I'm going to keep that rolling.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I think from the marketing standpoint, for the marketers that aren't necessarily at that cabinet level, to have this platform to learn about what's going on around campus has to be extraordinarily helpful in terms of telling stories outside of the podcast. Has that been the case for you?
It has. Sometimes, it spurs a story that we'll do in the campus, in the college magazine, and brings up topics that we want to explore even further or revisit. And now we're doing these mini series, and I can see where we might start to do those pretty frequently because while the episode allows us to dive deep into something and really learn a story, sometimes the story is even bigger than that. So if we can make it 2 or 3 episodes that are connected together, that seems really engaging. And so far, there's been a lot of interest in hearing those stories. Because that's the thing, with higher education today, I'm the mom of 2 young adults, one who just finished college and one who's midway through. And, there's a lot of choices for them and there's a lot of information. And I think this helps personalize Albright for students, who are here, students who are interested in coming, and their families. They really get to know us, and they get to know Jackie, which is great because, especially for first gen students, they really don't know what the dynamic is of college if they're first gen in their families. So they get to see that it's not intimidating, it's fun. And we're all about supporting one another and building a community of people who support, like our stories that we've done some episodes with alums who are still connected to faculty, even though they graduated decades ago, which is really heartening to hear. Yeah.
So Jackie, I'm wondering from the president's standpoint, there is an increased, obviously, pressure on college presidents to speak to societal issues, global issues. So I'm wondering if there's ever been an instance on Albright Out Loud where you've used that platform to provide your thoughts and kind of grapple with issues going on in the world.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Shane, because it's really difficult right now. Because no matter sometimes it feels like no matter what you say, you're going to get a backlash from somebody. And we have our expression statement at Albright is you can disagree with, but you can't disrespect. And that's what we try to hold to we're not always going to agree, but in fact, we should be able to disagree in a respectful manner. We've done this in a couple of episodes, but I think the most powerful one was Spring Awakening, which I already mentioned. The issues of gender, sexual identity, and abortion, it happened to coincide when we recorded it, right, with the time when Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade, and there's laws coming, all the don't say gay stuff that's going on down in Florida and other states. And both Jeff Lentz, the faculty member, and the student, Ben, they were just supremely articulate about why those issues mattered and what we needed to think about. That's why it's one of my favorite episodes. And I think, in fact, the podcast is a superb way to do this. It's not just me putting out the message, but it is a student and a faculty member and me having a conversation about what is it about those issues that matters.
I think you're spot on in terms of, we mentioned sort of the approachability of a podcast. It's a unique way for a president and others at an institution to grapple with these issues and give them voice from multiple perspectives. As you just mentioned, students, faculty, staff, leadership can all have a conversation that feels approachable and authentic. So I appreciate your insights there.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
So Matthew, from a faculty standpoint, in terms of your work, both in the classroom and from a research standpoint, how do you see digital platforms like podcasts shaping the future of faculty work and research?
I am a marketing professor, and I 100% believe that for me to be successful as a professor in higher education, that I need to market myself. And by doing that, I'm helping the institution, and there is a synergy back and forth between Albright marketing Albright and Professor Bieber marketing Professor Bieber. Coincidentally, last week was our spring break. I don't know what day, I think it was Wednesday. I was grading papers and I decided I was going to listen to a podcast because, as we said earlier, we all consume media at different points in times. And I listened to a podcast that Cal Newport was a guest on. Cal Newport is a computer science professor at Georgetown University. He's written quite a few books, including Digital Minimalism, and he recently just released a book called Slow Productivity. I would not have known about that book had I not listened to that podcast. And so I had to pick my son up early for an appointment. And I said to my boy, I said, hey, I'm going to get you a cookie. We're going to go to Barnes & Noble's and I'm going to get you a cookie today, because it was my way of bribing him so that I could go buy this book so that I could read it. I say this because Cal Newport, as a professor, is marketing himself, and he is using a podcast and he is using other forms of digital media to influence what I'm purchasing. And if things go well for me, I hope that one day somebody is listening to me on a podcast, tricks their kid, and goes and buys a book because of my guest spot on a podcast. I'm also a big believer in personal branding and making sure that people know me before I walk into a room. A podcast gives me a platform. It gives me that space to create social proof for myself that could potentially lead to other podcast appearances, speaking engagements, writing opportunities, research opportunities. And that's what I need to do in my role. And by me doing that in my role, I elevate Albright as an institution. So I see the future of podcasts, social media, and how professors are using them to elevate and amplify their work, but also elevate the institution. I'm not only creating social proof for myself, I'm creating social proof for Albright. And I'm hoping, I really truly hope that more professors will see it that way moving forward, and we'll be using these platforms to get our stories and our students' stories out to a greater audience.
That's fascinating. The last episode of Breaking Silos that aired was a conversation with a marketer and a administrator from Carroll Community College in Maryland, and they had recently launched an employee personal branding workshop that was kind of exactly what you're speaking to, just on in a LinkedIn format. So that's interesting to hear another sort of insight into personal branding, not only for the work you're doing for the individual, but also for the institution.
And let me just shameless plug, because this is what I do. Personal branding is a piece of my classes. My undergrad students are creating social proof for themselves now. I'm a big believer in that. Most experiences, most individuals were the same. There's hundreds and thousands of us. But what we bring from a unique perspective, what we bring to the situation, to the job, to our employer is our own unique perspectives and stories. And so if we give students and we give faculty and we give staff and we give administrators a way to share those stories, it can only benefit us in the long run.
Agreed. It's a great way to sort of raise the profile of the institution. Michelle, I want to kind of piggyback on what Matthew just said. I'm interested to hear from you. Like I said, as a fellow podcast host, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And to, find guests and stories to tell. It seems like you're doing okay there, but has there been any pushback from anybody, or any sort of hesitancy to say, I don't know if I want to be on a podcast. I'm not sure if I can do that.
I think that there's always people there. They never don't want to be on the show. But there's a level of understanding that it is just a casual conversation. And
Right.
Once they understand that, they don't have to memorize lines or study or prepare for being on the show. And Jackie really puts all of our guests at ease. She really is a natural when it comes to hosting this conversation, whatever the topic might be. And I think people, nobody's ever turned me down. And we've had plenty of people who want to be on the show. And when they do come, it's just such a warm, whether it's virtual or in person. Most of our recordings are in person. And it's just a fun chat. You actually forget that you're being recorded. You're just having a conversation.
I love that.
Which has been
I love
good.
that.
Yeah.
I hope you all have forgotten that you're being recorded.
Yeah.
So Jackie, I want to close with you. You're in season 3 of this podcast. How has Albright Out Loud fostered community engagement, innovation at Albright, and how long do you think you'll keep this going? And are there any specific topics you're excited to cover in the future?
Well, that's a big question. I think it definitely has fostered innovation. I think Matthew shared some of that. He learned from others on the podcast. I think that there have been others, like the student Jared Banks, who was on because we were talking about football, but he wanted to come back to explore his own issues about race on campus. He and a couple of others like that. So I think it gets people thinking. We had a faculty member who had heard the podcast, and she said, I teach ethical leadership, and I think it would be really fun to do a couple of episodes where we talk about ethical leadership, that I can use this in my class. And she did that. So it is fostering innovation in different ways, and ways that help the community to think about and talk about who and what we are. In terms of what I'm looking forward to, I think we have a stack of episodes. I'm really actually looking forward to, we've already talked about it, this mini series on excellence in teaching, because having Joe Hoyle, who is a nationally award-winning teacher, as Matthew said, from the University of Richmond, speak on 3 or 4 episodes and have a conversation with Albright faculty to compare teaching. And Matthew said, we had marketing and accounting and theater in that one. In another podcast, we had a sociology professor and a chemistry professor, and the organic chemistry professor was talking about how they brought active learning into organic chemistry and raised the average grade in first semester chemistry by like more than a whole grade point average.
Wow.
And Professor Keister was talking about in sociology how she had a student who was a co-creator who actually received funding to create a first-year seminar with her on the Star Wars of sociology. So the student actually began to and was a creator of the course with her, which is still offered. It's one of our popular first-year seminars.
Amazing.
And Joe has this amazing way, because he's been teaching for so long and he's so thoughtful about teaching, of kind of integrating that with what he does. And even though we've already recorded a couple of these episodes, every time he talks, I learn something new about teaching. So I'm excited about that. And then we have a couple of episodes. There have been a couple of really cool things that faculty and students have done lately. Like one of our faculty members took a group of students on a dinosaur dig to learn about, it was about physiology, anatomy and physiology. And he took them on a dinosaur dig, and we're looking forward to doing that one. So these stories are just fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And plenty of them to tell, which is great. So I want to thank all three of you for joining me. I've listened to the podcast in preparation for this show. It's fantastic. I would encourage others listening. The link to the show will be in the show notes of this episode. I would encourage any marketer listening to send it to your leadership, because it really can prove to be a valuable tool in amplifying what's going on your campus. So I appreciate you not only doing this work, but joining me to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shane, for the invitation.
Yes,
it's
thank you, Shane.
wonderful.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your host. Learn from Dave Cabilds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.